Okay, so good morning, everyone. So, like I said in the last class, we'll start with the five kingdom classification. Now, the reason why we are studying, which I had mentioned yesterday a bit, is like, let's say, if you find a new species or if you want to identify a particular species, in either ways, we need to classify that particular organism into certain categories, so we will know more about that particular organism. So it's like you find a kind of worm crawling on the ground, and then you would like to know what would be the name of this particular worm. So you look at the characteristic, you identify, you put them into certain class, and then you would get to know the name. So that is the in general process. So that is one of the reason why we need to know the five kingdom classification. So in general, the topics which are covered in your syllabus, they talk about like brief outline. What are those different five kingdoms? Certain characteristics of these, like main characteristics we'll be looking at. And of course, the suitable examples, including all of this, like Monera protista, then Plantae, and Plantae had certain subtypes. And even in the animal category or the Animalia kingdom, there are certain categories which we will be looking at. Because let's say, for example, again, if you go and visit a seashore somewhere coastal, and there you find so many creatures in the sand there. So those creatures, they are like, they need to be mostly put into these categories, non-chordates or echinodermata or chordates, either ways, whichever they are. So that is very interesting exercise. We will do that probably, but with the pictures, of course, so that we will have quite a lot of idea about it. Okay, and please bear with me. The first part is little theoretical, because there is a kind of storyline that goes along how this five kingdom classification came into picture. So, like, if I start from the even the earlier part of the story, like around 1860, there was this guy called Gregor Mendel, who was studying these garden pea plants, and then he identified certain genetic characteristics, and he also identified that some genes are getting transferred from the parent generation to offspring generation, and then they pass on their characteristics. And then he had done experiment, like, let's say, for example, if we crossed a plant with purple flower with another plant with purple flower, that means the fertilization had happened between these two plants, and the gametes which were produced, or the flowers which were produced in the next generation, they were all purple. Or if we crossed purple flower with white flower, then whatever offsprings or whatever next generation he produced, it produced white as well as purple. So how the segregation of the genes, what character should go to the next generation, he studied all of that using that garden pea plant. And after that, somewhere in 19th century, in the first decade, 1905 or so, genetics evolved in terms of like, they identified there are certain factors. Like, now we know this terminology as genes, but earlier they used to call as factors, like genetic factors. They were not called as genes. So gene terminology was established, then most of the study based on genetic, how the mitosis happens, how the meiosis happens, all of that was studied by 1910. And then later on, slowly genetics evolved. So that is when somewhere around 1960 or 69, almost after 100 years of Mendel studied, this five kingdom classification came into picture. So it mostly consists of, it is a simplistic way of grouping living things. All the living things that exist on the earth, they are included into this five kingdom classification. So as of now, there is no species which is left out, which is not classified into certain category into this five kingdom classification. And remember, this five kingdom classification is like a topmost category in the hierarchy. There are several subcategories to it that we will study when we are looking at each of the kingdom. And these grouping of the living thing is specifically based on the simple distinctive character. And like I mentioned, if you look at a particular organism, you look at its own characteristic, and that's based on those characteristics, it can be grouped into certain categories or certain classes or kingdoms, and then you identify, okay, this particular organism could be certain example. So classification system, they are always changing as new information is made available. Now this was the case quite earlier. Nowadays there are very few species which are being identified as such, but somewhere around, like, let's say late 19th century, uh, like almost every now and then people used to identify new species, especially in the wild forest or untouched by human, and that's when the new information for that particular species was always getting added. Simplest example being, like, we know there are so many lizards around us, right? But all the lizards are not same. Some are like small in size, some are big in size, some are called rock lizard, some are called house lizard or whatsoever, you know. So there are several such subcategories at the end of this kingdom in the hierarchy, and that these animals or these living things, they have been classified and they have been updated with the new information that is available as and when it comes to the researcher. So the classification system always keeps on changing that way. Like another analogy of this is, like, we all know that Pluto was considered as a planet, but later on it is not considered as planet. It's called as dwarf planet or pseudo planet or whatsoever, right? So that way the classification system for that particular thing changed. Similarly, it happens in case of some of the living organism as well, that their class, based on more and more information, it does change over the time. But not necessarily always for every living organism. These are few and rare cases. Now, modern technologies such as genetics makes it possible to unravel the evolutionary relationship. Now, can anyone explain me what is this evolutionary relationship? Anyone in the on the other side of the planet? Those who are on the other side of planet. People.
I don't think anyone is from other side of the planet.
I am talking to you people.
Yeah, can I answer? Can I try answering? I'm not sure.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, but like, so animals adapt to the environment, right? To like, they develop certain features to adapt to the environment. Like giraffes, they're so tall now because like the taller ones could eat the leaves. So then the taller ones only like reproduced again.
Okay. But how is it evolutionarily related?
Yeah, so like it's evolution, right?
Yeah, it is evolution for sure. That developing that long neck of a giraffe is part of evolution. But how is it related to the other organism?
I can't I don't know how to explain this.
Anyone else? Anyone else wants to add anything? She said it correctly to some extent. You people, anyone? Ahona, are you hiding behind me? Rohan, what is evolutionary relationship?
Isn't evolution basically make everything much more sufficient?
Does evolution make?
Isn't evolution just to make everything easier and more sufficient? So
Not
efficient.
not easier. That is what one of the characteristic of living thing is, adaptation, right? I don't know if I can give any example. Yeah, for example, those animals which are living at the polar areas of the earth, they have very thick fur and they can sustain. That means they have adapted to those situations, right? Similarly, the ones which are in the tropical countries, they will have very thin skin comparatively.
But how do they evolve?
Yeah, one second, I have a question. So like the skin doesn't have a brain of its own, right? How does it become thicker, thinner?
So this is the process that happens over almost thousands of years. It's not a sudden change that occurs. So that is when when we talk of evolution or when we talk of adaptation, we take a time frame of millions of years. And within that millions of years, we break it down into certain thousands of years. And during those thousands of years, a particular species adapt to the situation that is present or wherever they are present, and then they go on and do whatever they are supposed to make changes. Yes, Prakriti and Yajnesh then.
Yeah, so maybe it means that they share an ancestor, like it all started from one thing, the amoeba. No, yeah. And then they developed into different things, and then more like all the animals share one ancestor.
Yeah. Yajnesh.
So yeah, so I wanted to answer what Vidushi asked. So basically, due to over generations, there would be small mutations in the skin cells or the hair cells, and these small mutations uh, over time, like it would spread on through generation to generation, and whoever didn't have these mutations would just die. So it's called natural selection, right?
Yes, but natural selection is something else. It is related to evolution for sure. So what Prakriti said correctly, and even Vidushi had said it in part earlier. It's like, so if we talk about evolutionary relationship, like a particular organism has a common ancestor. Like simple thing that we say is we are also monkeys in a way, right? That's a common thing because we have a common ancestor probably. Means maybe thousands of years back, there were a common species which existed, which later on adapted to certain situation and became two different species, like chimpanzees and monkeys and human, right? So these are all different species as of now.
Chimpanzees, monkeys, humans, orangutans, etc.
Yeah, there are so many of those ape category, right? Apes category. So during those period, so and again what Yajnesh said, Yajnesh, it does not change. Let's say for example, skin cell we talked about. Usually, if the mutation are in what we call as somatic cell, the changes does not go into the next generation. And while I say that somatic cell, it means all the other body cell except the sex cells. So if we talk of the changes in the sperm and ova, then only the mutation or whatever that change has happened, it goes into the next generation, right? Otherwise, let's say I have a liver and certain liver cells, they are mutated, or let's say my pancreas cells, they are mutated and they don't produce insulin more. That does not mean my next generation will have the same mutation. But let's say the sperm of a particular individual or eggs or ova of a particular female, they are mutated, or their cells or their genetic makeup has mutated a bit. Those will translate to the next generation, right? And usually it's not the case that all the mutation will lead to the changes always. There are certain mutation which does not lead to any changes, right? So this is majorly the adaptation to the environmental factors. Based on that, body does certain changes, right? It's another simplistic example which is not of evolution, but it is of adaptation for sure. For example, if I stay hungry for longer number of days, let's say I skip my lunch, right? My stomach will get used to that situation. Like even if I don't eat, let's say after a month, I might feel very drowsy for a month while I'm practicing this, but after a month, my stomach will get used to it. The stomach will know that at this particular time, this fellow does not eat at all. So let's not secrete any acid. So that is a part of adaptation. And if we continue for lifetime like this, then certain genetic changes do happen within the cells, and that might get translated to next generation. But then the question is still whether they really go to the next generation or whether they stay with the parent generation itself. So that way, this evolutionary relationship, they have certain context with respect to the adaptation between different species. Obviously, all of these categories, like we all know, first cell, it came from constituted RNA and protein. Then they formed the first cell, which was prokaryotic, then it became eukaryotic, which was still unicellular, then it became multicellular, and from multicellular, it became complex organism, complex multicellular system. So that is a process of billions of years, right? So just from single cell for the complex organism, this whole process took almost 1.8 billions of years or so. I might be wrong in the number of these years, but somewhere around that. And when we talk of this, that means we all have some common ancestor. Another example that I would like to give here is there is a very well-studied fruit fly. Its scientific name is Drosophila melanogaster. You can just remember Drosophila. So Drosophila is very tiny fruit fly, maybe hardly 2 millimeter or so. But this Drosophila is found to have certain genes which are similar to human beings. And that is what we call as evolutionary conserved organism or evolutionary conserved genes. That means throughout the process of evolution, even though human has changed in terms of its characteristic, but certain genes which were existent in the fruit fly, they have not changed up to this level, which might be again after few tens of thousands of years, right? So that way, the two organisms can be evolutionarily related to each other based on the characteristics, based on the similarities and differences that they have. And because of these studies of evolution or the evolutionary relationship between two animals or two living organisms, the new information is always available, and that way it becomes more and more easier to classify into a particular category. Let me ask if you have any questions now. Sleepy? Anyone has any question? I hope this part was clear of the evolutionary relationship. People, I hope you are not sleeping.
Also,
Okay. So now going forward, so the five kingdom system was actually developed by this guy called as Robert Whittaker, and this happened in sometime in 1969. But he had certain background studies which were done earlier by this Carolus Linnaeus. It is simply also called as Carl, C-A-R-L, and Linnaeus. You will find different names available. This was the complete name. Probably he was called as a short name by that Carl. So there was this guy who had studied, and he had developed this two kingdom classification. Based on that, Whittaker developed five kingdom classification later. Now, because we are studying this aspect, we need to know the definition of what is classification, right? You might be able to explain in terms of simple English vocabulary, but then the scientific definition or biological definition of this classification is, it is the system of assembling organism into groups on the basis of their likeness or variances. So it's just grouping of organism based on their likeness or you can say similarities or differences. That is also fine. So that is the definition of classification. Now it simplifies the study of wide variety of organisms in a systematic manner. Now, first and foremost question that comes to our mind when we talk of classification, why do we need to classify certain things? Won't it be better if we just identify things by or living things by their name? Wouldn't that be sufficient? But then in that case, let's say if I have to study a vertebrate, I need to understand what that vertebrate category is, and then I can study different species within it. Or let's say I want to identify a particular plant species, right? I need to study it well detail, only that particular category. I need to be aware of what are the characteristics of that particular category. So that way, like for example, all the cactus, if I want to study, I need to know what is that cactus first of all. So that is what is the systematic study of the living organisms. And usually this diversity of living organism is studied by grouping them according to increasing similarity or from less complex to more complex types. So this classification is based on the diversity, and this diversity goes like from the higher category, that is from 5 kingdoms. If we go into the subcategories, they will have more and more similarity, and they will have less like earlier, like if we talk of just plant category or plant kingdom, they will have less complexity. But as and when we go into specific types, let's say for example angiosperm and gymnosperm, like flowering and non-flowering plant, then the complexity has increased, because there we study what is flower, what are the parts of flower, what do they do, and all of it. So the complexity increases in the hierarchy, as well as the similarity also increases down in the hierarchy, because all the flowering plants, they will have certain common characteristics. So similarity increases, complexity also increases in the subcategories of this 5 kingdom classification. Any question again? And like I said, this part is little theoretical. We need to be aware of certain facts, so we need to go through all of this for sure. Okay, so now this Whitaker, while he studied this classification system, or while he designed this classification system, this was majorly based on few characteristics which are mentioned here. For example, mode of nutrition, whether a plant or whether a living thing is able to make food on its own or not able to make food on its own, and is dependent on other species. Thallus organization. Does anyone know what is thallus? Have you heard it somewhere?
Is this Robert H. Whitaker related to Romulus?
Which Whitaker?
Romulus
I don't know. Who is it?
is a snake.
No clue.
No.
Oh, no. Oh, so okay. So thallus is actually so there was, even before the Whitaker studied this particular 5 kingdom classification, there was a category called as thallophytes or thallophyta, right? Which included when the leaf and the stem, they were growing together. So you might have seen certain fungi which grows like leaf-like, especially that broccoli-like leaf, right? So that is when that particular structure was named as thallus. So there were these fungi or lichen or algae which were also put in that category, and that particular organization of structure is thallus organization. Then cell structure, how are the cells arranged? Phylogenetic relationship. Again, anyone knows what is phylogenetic?
Half genetic.
Sorry, come again.
I'm guessing like half genetic, like share half the gene.
So phyla refers to categories, right? So based on the genetic of a particular living thing, they are categorized into different organisms or species, you can say. So, and the relationship between two, which is ultimately the evolutionary tree or evolutionary relationship between different organisms. That is what is phylogenetic, but it is in the subcategories of one particular kingdom and so on. And of course, the ways of reproduction. Some animals or some plants, they either reproduce by sexual mode, or some reproduce by asexual mode. Some plants they undergo vegetative propagation. That means their leaf or stem itself is good enough to reproduce a new species, or sorry, new organism. Or in case of bacteria, they just divide simply by binary fission, which is just separate, duplicating itself and then separating. So that way, there are several modes of these different characteristics. And Whitaker, while he was studying this 5 kingdom, he took all this into consideration. And he designed 5 categories, which is Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. Monera and Protista, you may not be aware, but the rest 3 categories, I am sure all of you would be knowing. Fungi, you commonly see again in the Sahyadri campus. Plantae includes all the plants that you know of. Animalia includes all the animals, again, that you know of. Monera is specific to the unicellular prokaryotic organisms. Unicellular prokaryotic means your bacteria, right? They are unicellular and plus they are prokaryotic. Protista is unicellular eukaryotic, right? Eukaryotic means they have true nucleus. For example, amoeba or paramecium or some types of unicellular algae. These are all parts of Protista. Fungi, all the types of fungus that you know around is included in the fungus. And that way these 5 kingdoms, they are developed. And of course, plant and animals, you know. So this started with this Carl Linnaeus, where he first came up with this 2 kingdom classification, and he had only designed 2 classes. One was plant, other one was animal. So everything that was able to move and able to sexually reproduce and so on, that was put into kingdom Animalia. And all those stationary living things like plants and fungus, they will all put into one category called kingdom Plantae, right? Now, but then this 2 kingdom classification lasted for a very long time earlier, but did not last forever because it did not take into many parameters while classifying. For example, all these classification that Whitaker had used was actually the drawback of the 2 kingdom classification system, because it did not differentiate between eukaryote and prokaryote, which had drastically different functions, right? So all the bacteria, all the fungus, they were put into category of the plant. So all the prokaryote and all the eukaryote, they were mixed together. So that way, Whitaker separated them. And what Whitaker did was, he separated unicellular to multicellular. He separated prokaryotic to eukaryotic, and that way the segregation was done. And of course, then later on, many categories were considered. So neither the unicellular nor multicellular nor photosynthetic or non-photosynthetic, none of these points were considered while classifying into this 2 kingdom. And that is when Whitaker was the one who proposed this 5 kingdom classification. Yes.
Is it Plantae and Animalia basically flora?
Who?
Plantae and
Huh?
Animalia, isn't it the same as flora and fauna?
Yeah. These are just the common language names. These are the names of the kingdom. Again, one common mistake that we usually do, we don't usually call it a kingdom plant. Yeah, plant is a common name, or kingdom animal. That is again a common name. We always write Plantae and Animalia. So that is one point that you all should note as well. Okay, so I will just show you this video which talks about like a journey of this guy called Carl Linnaeus. And of course, there are so many resources. So if we go on, click on this website, Linnean.org, you will find a lot of resources about this, like this fellow himself, how he studied, then what were the experiments that he conducted. There are various videos and various information. You can look it up. So I'll just play this video. You can have a look at it. If it is not audible or not visible, you can watch it on your own later. But as of now, I'm playing it here.
Carl Linnaeus was born in the southern Swedish province of Småland in 1707 and is considered to be one of the most influential scientists of his time. His life's work was to develop and refine a way to group life on Earth, or to classify it. So straightforward was his system, it is still used by scientists and understood by people across the world today. His father, Niels Ingmarsson Linnaeus, was both an avid gardener and a Lutheran pastor, and Carl showed a deep love of plants and a fascination with their names from a very early age. While studying medicine at both the universities of Lund and the University of Uppsala in Sweden, he devoted a large amount of his time to the study of plants, and in 1732 he mounted a botanical expedition to Lapland. Over 5 months, he travelled some 3,000 miles, collecting biological specimens and taking notes. In 1734, he mounted another expedition to central Sweden.
He was an empiricist. He didn't believe things that he hadn't seen with his own eyes. He was very reluctant to take on trust something that somebody had written about.
In 1735, Linnaeus moved to the Netherlands, and it was in that same year that he published his most well-known work, the Systema Naturae, or the System of Nature. In it, he outlined a new system for the naming of all living things.
There are, I guess, two main things that Carl Linnaeus tends to be known for. The one is, as far as his classification systems, which at the time were really rather revolutionary, particularly in the plant kingdom, rather less so as the animals. And the second thing is his introduction of a new naming system using a genus name and a species name, the so-called binomial system. Now, of the two, it's the latter, it's the naming system that is his primary legacy.
This item is the first edition of Systema Naturae, the one where Linnaeus actually outlines his sexual system for classifying plants, basically by the number of stamens and the arrangement of the reproductive organs. So this is the first time it's appeared in print, and so that's why it's important. You can see it's very large, and I tend to explain it as being the 18th century version of an Excel spreadsheet, because you can see it's very table-like. By the time the 10th edition appeared in 1758, this had shrunk from this really large size to a much more sort of portable thing, but it had gone from only 11 pages to 2 fat volumes.
Returning to Sweden in 1738, he practiced medicine, specialising in the treatment of syphilis, and lectured in Stockholm before being awarded a professorship at Uppsala University in 1741. Throughout his life, Linnaeus showed an interest in nature and the systems which govern it. He wrote not just about classification, but also about ecology, how organisms interact with their environment. He explored food chains and even defined the concept of race, dividing humans into 4 groups: Americanus, Asiaticus, Africanus, and Europeanus. Forced to retire from teaching in 1774 by a stroke, Linnaeus suffered a further stroke and eventually died in 1778. Linnaeus was driven by a lust for all nature and the desire to understand and classify it. His legacy remains and is used by the many dedicated scientists today who are driven by that same desire.
So, if you all see, there was a kind of picture shown where he had drawn few things. So obviously back in 17th century, there were no photographs. So you can imagine how many drawings he would have to draw at every time if he sees something new. And considering the amount of diversity that exists around us, like even if we go around and just try to draw the flowers, probably it will take 100 pages to draw all of them, right? So, and then he went on studying at different places. He went on studying at different categories of the plants, then put them together, which look similar, and then give a name, certain name to them, right? So that way he did extensive amount of work. And that is what was published in his work called as the System of Nature. I guess there is some English translation available of his work. You can Google it, probably you will find it. The whole of the work that was done by him, including the kind of those tables that he had drawn, they are also there. Does anyone have any question as of now? Okay, so for today we will stop here. We will continue with this with the next class. So there is a very interesting story of also this Whitaker guy. So we'll try to look at that as well in the next class, and then we'll continue with those individual 5 kingdoms. So we will have more of these identification processes of most of the organism, where you will get more clarity of each and every organism. Anyone wants to ask any question?